Are you unmuted?
Yeah.
Oh, great, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to our meeting of our FEMA BRIC-funded project on seamless flood risk mapping, developing a seamless flood risk mapping tool for the coastal and inland waters of Rhode Island in a changing climate. We hope you're all having a good afternoon and staying dry. We're all here together at the URI Bay campus in Narragansett, where it is stormy. And yeah, we'd love to dive into our presentation and discussion today. We're really excited to share the progress that our team has made over the last year. Given the important applications of this work to flood preparedness and mitigation, we're excited to provide updates and request feedback from this group of people. To begin with our agenda for the meeting, we will begin with some introductions and then move into part one of this discussion, which is tailored to a broader audience to provide an overview of progress to date, share the dashboard that we're developing so that users can access our data, and we'll include time for questions, feedback, and discussion of applications. We expect that part of the agenda to wrap up around 1:45. You are welcome to hop off the call at that point or continue staying on if you would like to stick around for our more technical presentation of methods and data, which we've prepared for folks that are more familiar with hydrological and hydraulic modeling. And that will include a technical presentation followed by Q&A and a panel discussion with our URI research team here in the room. The way we'd like to structure this is to please ask folks to hold questions till the end of each of the presentations that Reza Hashemi is going to be giving. And you're also welcome to go ahead and put questions into the chat as they come up so that you don't forget about them. And we'll circle back to them during our designated Q&A time. So to begin with introductions, I'm Eliza Berry and I work here at URI at the Coastal Resources Center and as part of Rhode Island Sea Grant. And I do a lot of extension work around coastal resilience and flood resilience issues. Let's then move on to Reza, please, if you could introduce yourself.
So thanks everyone for attending. I'm Reza Hashemi, Associate Professor in the Department of Ocean Engineering and Graduate School of Oceanography. And I'm leading the technical part of this project.
Arash, can you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, my name is Arash Shafi. I'm a PhD student under the supervision of Professor Hashemi. And I'm working on that, providing that starting maps.
Great, thanks.
Thank you.
Chris?
Good afternoon, everyone. I am Christopher Damon. I'm part of the Environmental Data Center within the Department of Natural Resources at URI. And I am working with the team with data visualization and managing the online map components.
Thanks. And Malcolm.
I'm Malcolm Spaulding, Professor Emeritus of Ocean Engineering. I served on the faculty for 40 years. I've been emeritus for 12 years. I founded the development of STORMTOOLS in 2014 under the direction of Rhode Island CRMC, and I've continued to be involved with that development, as have our capstone students.
Olivia.
Hi, my name is Olivia McGranahan, and I'm currently a fellow with Rhode Island Sea Grant.
Thanks. And Rashad.
Hello everyone, I'm Professor Amini. I'm Assistant Professor in Ocean Engineering and Civil Engineering Department at URI. Also, I'm working with the URI team focusing on the structural damage assessment. Good to be here.
Thank you. And finally, we would love to see who is in the room today We obviously don't have time to go through person by person, but if you could please write into the chat your name and organization, we would really appreciate it. And then I'd love to turn it over to Professor Hashemi to give a presentation on the project.
Thanks, Eliza, for the introduction. So I would ask if you cannot hear me or if there is a problem with the audio, please write in the chat so we figure things out. So this is a large effort supported by many people, and many people have worked on it. This is just showing like people, some of the people that have supported. I would like to thank Rianne Hope from Rhode Island Emergency Management and Gordon Benz from USGS and Dr. Amini, as well as Rhode Island Coastal Resources Management Center and Rhode Island Department of Environmental Management that are supporting the STORMTOOLS initiatives. The project is funded by the Department of Homeland Security through FEMA and also through Rhode Island Emergency Management. And you already know the team they have been introduced. So we are going to have, as Eliza said, two presentations. The first one is more light and it's very generic for general and public audience. The second one is more technical. And we also have been working on a paper that we're going to publish the technical part later. So about this project is about flooding. And I'm going to talk about the detail of what we are planning to do. This is like a slide that I created today from National Weather Service. At the same time of the presentation, we have a flood warning in Rhode Island. So the flood is an important problem for a lot of communities in Rhode Island, and the project is focused on it. So this is some examples of recent flooding that you could see last year happened and the other years have happened. Like in 2010, we had this very large flooding in Rhode Island. And this shows how they impact the streets and the communities. So in terms of the assessment of the flood risk, obviously we have FEMA insurance maps that people are using to assess the flood risk. So in general, FEMA flood maps, they have these flood zones that if you are in a 100-year flood zone, you have a more risk, and it has another one which is one over 500-year flood zone, which is a less risk. So we have these tools, and what is wrong? I mean, what is it missing in the tool? I'm going to talk about that in a second. So this is another slide about giving information about flood zones. As you can see, we have these blue areas, which are like flood zone, and then you have the other area, which is like yellowish kind of orange color, zone X, which I don't think you're required to have a flood insurance, but you are still have a chance to be flooded. So the problem with the gap in the FEMA maps is that the sea levels are rising, and because the FEMA is focusing on today, it does not include the impact of the sea level rise for flooding on the coastal areas. So Malcolm and others, and I have been also helping him, have initiated these STORMTOOLS for the state of Rhode Island, which addresses the impact of climate change on flood zone maps. And the idea is this tool would be used for regulations and planning in the state. And it has been successful. People are using it. They have scenarios of maps, including the impact of sea level rise for the coastal areas. So you see snapshots on the right that you have a current map, and then you have 3 feet, 5 feet, 7 feet, and 10 feet of sea level rise. So the problem is we have this tool and it's working fine. What about flood inland? So that's our question. So before I move forward, this is like some of the other visualization of the storm tools showing like in Warren how and Barrington how the more houses will become part of the flood zone in future because of the sea level rise. So that is that's the first part of the storm tools. So the other thing that we have been working on it since 2017 is how about rainfall? Is also rainfall changing in Rhode Island? If it's changing, so we have the same story about inland flooding. And the idea is to have this inland and coastal flooding maps both showing the effect of the change in flooding, regardless of it's in the coast or is it like near a river. So this is a lot of numbers, I apologize, but I highlighted just one number that makes sense. So if you look at rainfall in Rhode Island, this is rainfall data for TFP in April. The once in 100 year or the flood with a 1% chance for 20-hour or 1 day rainfall is about 8 inches, right? That's what we have found out that this is changing. So this rainfall is changing and it's actually going, I'll show you some pictures. This is changing up to around 10 inches, which is a 500-year event. So it's kind of the 500-year event is becoming a 100-year event in Rhode Island, approximately based on the data. So we have this figure from the state report about the hazard mitigation planning, which shows on average the rainfall is increasing, as you can see on the East Coast. We also have the extreme wind as extreme precipitation also changing by these numbers. So for like a 100-year event, between 30 to 35% increase, depending on what future you're looking at it. So if you're looking at 2017, you're talking about 35% change of precipitation. So that's why we started by the support of the Rhode Island Emergency Management. We are updating the storm tools to include the inland flooding and also having the scenarios of what will happen in future due to the changes in precipitation. So that is our job or our objective. And we also creating hydrologic modeling tools that it could be used for other purposes, like for instance, looking at the impact of dams and other things on the flooding or debris. We are focusing on large watersheds. I'll show you a map next slide. We are not doing it for every small stream in Rhode Island. We are focusing on large watersheds. And we want to communicate these maps through storm tools. So if you go to the storm tools website, you're going to see FEMA maps. You're going to see the 100-year inland flooding, as well as what happens if you consider these changes in precipitation. So these are the large watersheds that we are looking at it. Blackstone, Moshasek, Monasquota, Pit, Potoxet, we have already done work on it. And then Wood, Pocata. basin. Those are like large watersheds that we have been working on that. And then, as I mentioned, we are going to deliver this as an online free access web page in a STORMTOOLS that people can use. The timeline of project is 3 years. We are at the first year of the project. We are going to have another 2 years to complete this. I'm not going to go through all of this tasks, obviously, but it's 3 years. All right. So this slide helps us a bit to understand this product and what we are doing. So we have rainfall, and then the rainfall is going to be converted on runoff, or it is going to infiltrate to the groundwater. And it's going to go to a river, which is going to create a river flow. So obviously, when you are changing the rainfall, you are increasing the runoff, and then you are increasing the river flow. And if you increase the river flow, you see the house on the right. So if that house could become in flood zone. So it was not in flood zone because of this change in precipitation. The runoff is going to increase and river. The other impact is some areas, even the groundwater table is going to go up, and it could impact septic tanks and other things. So that is what we are doing. So based on some of the studies, including a study in Cornell University, we have come up with this kind of scenarios of 27% or 35% increase in extreme precipitation that we are basing our maps based on that. Obviously, this could change, but we have to start with some numbers like sea level rise numbers. So we started with this 27 and 35% to release the first. And this is just a cartoon of our methodology, and then I will finish about this part, and we're just going to go and show you some of the results. So we first have developed models that tell us how the precipitation is going to change the river flow based on the slide that I showed you. Then we are mapping that increased flow in the river to see how much flooding or increased flooding you will have when you superimpose those onto a topographic map of the state. It shows you which houses or which properties or which infrastructure is going to be affected. So we have these three components that I have to also thank Ara. She has been doing all of this modeling work for this project, and also Chris Damon for providing those maps. Right. So by now we have almost finished these two watersheds, Vunas Waterkit and Moshasek River. So we are gonna, the idea is that we're gonna present that to you, and then we would like the feedback of the people and stakeholders and everybody who cares about this, to see what we can do for the other watersheds or what we have to change for this one that we have already done. These are like in the Providence area, 50 and 23 square miles are the area of the watersheds. This shows the hydrologic models and how we divided them to like more sub-basins. This is an interesting map. It's technical, but I showed it because this shows the impact of the land use on runoff, right? So if you look at these numbers, when they are like 91 to 100, that means that those areas are developed and you expect more runoff due to the rainfall. Whereas if you go to upper parts, you could see a much lower runoff coefficient or CN values that we are looking at. So it's not the same if you are increasing the rainfall, depending on which area you are, you're gonna see more or less impact on the river or runoff. Again, this is based on a lot of work that we did to see how this changes in precipitation, which is like 27% and 35%, if I round it up, for a 100-year event, is going to change the flood in a river, right? So we looked at our hydrologic model, we looked at other works, and we came up with something like, for instance, it could create 50%. Like if you are increasing the rainfall by 35%, the river in the flood in a river could increase by 50%, which is much higher than the increase in the, or significantly higher than what you can see in the river. And those numbers are kind of subjective and a bit, but we have looked at others, and it's kind of showing a trend. And so now, so what we have done so far, we looked at the change in precipitation, we looked at how much more flooding you're gonna have in the rivers, and then we run our models, we created the FEMA map scenario first to see how our flood maps compares with the FEMA flood maps. They compare relatively well. And then we increased the rainfall and flow rate in the river, and then we generated additional maps. So I have some slides as examples. So like around Pawtucket and Moshasset River, so like those areas, 1, 2, 3, there are a lot of examples. Depending on where you are, you could look at it. For instance, this is showing an area which was not in the flood zone, but this hatched area shows that those will be added to the flood zone. And this is something that we are gonna provide access for the communities to look at the FEMA maps, to look at the no precipitation and changes, as well as how the precipitation change is going to impact it. So you see that you have increased flooding areas and other areas that I mean, depending on where you are, this is like some examples on locations around those that you could see the increased area on the flood. We have the capacity to show, in addition to the extent of the flooding, also the flood depth and how, because that's important for residential buildings to wanted to see if they wanted to mitigate that, what kind of flood depth they are expecting around their property. We have very good maps for the DEM or topography. So that's similar to the STORMTOOLS coastal part, which we are going to benefit from. So we have been kind of translating those information to a website, the STORMTOOLS website. You could just use this to connect, or let me go online. So
I'll put it in the chat.
yeah, if I go to here, just simply, if you Google STORMTOOLS, we could find it. Storm, so together. So if you go to STORMTOOLS website, then right. So there is a link for Inland STORMTOOLS, and if you scroll down, map viewer. Right. So this shows the 100-year event, and you could see, so we have our own 100-year event, which should be similar to the FEMA maps. There are not in some areas, this is a good discussion point that especially Chris Damon to talk about why in some areas they don't match exactly. Because we basically are using maybe more detail like topography or it could be other reasons. But we have like this 27% change in precipitation in a 100-year event. And like another one, 35% change. So these are that you could zoom in and look at the flood maps, right? So they are this is something that we could go on live and play with it. And I have to say that this is just a trial. There could be a lot of issues. Still, we are working on it. We have not released the final product. Obviously, we have to check everything, but this is like showing a demonstration so basically I showed you how to get there. I go to the STORMTOOLS website, Inland STORMTOOLS. In the bottom of the page, you see all of these 3 tabs. There's a plan that we are going to add other things like offsets. So we are going to add offsets to the 100-year events in addition to those kind of hydrologic-based products. Right. So this. Right. So, sorry, I'm going backward. I switched from Mac to Windows, so I'm doing things right. So far we have created these hydrologic models, and we have improved the hydraulic model of which was or the cross sections of the river that was provided to us by USGS. We have finished this too. We have compared our maps with FEMA maps, and we also have investigated or come up with how the change in precipitation is going to impact the low flooding rivers. And so the next step, we are working on other watersheds. Obviously, we are working on a 500-year return period as well as that. And also, so the work on progress in other watersheds. So I have to, before I finish this part, I want to also mention we also have recently got 2 other projects that are related. So the first one is that we are working on another toolbox, which we call it next generation toolbox, which is the difference with the storm tools that I presented. It's more detailed. It has information about other type of flooding. So for instance, we have been working just on river flooding. You could have a street flooding or fluvial flooding or flooding which is not because of the rivers, it could be because of the stormwater. So we are working on that, especially if the storm drainage system or storm collecting system is failing, how that it's going to play out. So those are like a small town kind of project rather than a statewide project. Therefore, we are focusing on 2 counties on the east coast of the bay, which are Newport and Bristol County. So we are working on 6 towns there and working with those towns to work on that. We are also looking at how the risk can be managed. So especially Marshall, who is the PI on that project, it's going to look at like what you could do, for instance, floodproofing. You could do a lot of things to reduce the risk, and so we are going to add those to the tools, to the communities, as well as like wind damage and other non-flood related damage. So this is like focus more detailed analysis on those 2 counties. The other one is, as you may have heard, and we are going to discuss it more at the panel discussion, the rule for planning and development of how like residential housing has changed, and instead of a 100-year event, now you have to use a 500-year event. And those are not available. So this is focused on providing the communities and the state agencies with 500-year flood maps, and Chris Baxter and Malcolm Spaulding, who are leading that project. They are both present, and we could discuss that. That's also another funded project there. And that is my presentation.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was-
Stop sharing or?
I think you can keep that up for a second.
Okay.
Thank you so much for the overview of progress to date. I think now we'd like to just transition into asking questions or asking the audience if you have any questions from what Reza has just shared with us. The questions I have up on the screen are some kind of group discussion questions we can get to in a second. But first, are there any points of clarification that you have on Reza's talk? If so, you can raise your hand and we'll call on you to unmute, or feel free to add any questions, comments into the chat. Okay, I'm just gonna hang tight for a minute while folks brainstorm about any questions you may have. Okay, well, here we go. We have one. Let's see. Tom Kravitz. I'm going to unmute you.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, great.
Yeah, this is excellent work. I'm very impressed with it. And my question might not even be, I don't know if it's worthwhile of a pursuit, but with all the data out there, with the increase in rain, right? Is it worthwhile looking at when that rain is coming now? You know, I'm thinking in terms of, is it coming more frequently during the winter months where there could be a frost, which could impact the rate of river rise in areas that are non-urban, say?
Yeah, I mean, that's an excellent point. So we have two problems or two issues to look at the timing of rain. One is the actual real-time forecasting, which is not here. So that would be also good to, for instance, forecast if there's a rainfall coming, like in 2 or 3 days, you show these flood maps with the depth, and especially if it's a big flood, and then say, okay, all of these houses would probably be flooded. So that timing, like providing the exact timing, would be very helpful. There is National Weather Service has a forecast, but it's very limited to just stations, a couple of stations. It doesn't cover the watershed. So I think that timing is important, like when this flood happens. The other one, as you pointed out, is like when you have this increased precipitation. Are we talking about winter storms or spring storms, or when that exactly happened? That's like something that we have not included in our analysis, but certainly they are important. So if you want to dig down more into that question, that would be also, we could include like scenarios, like what could happen, worst scenarios, average scenarios, or the best scenario. And like, for instance, if you could have a couple of rainfalls back to back, like 2010 event, then the soil would be saturated already. So even with the same rainfall, you will have much more flooding. So you could look at those scenarios, I mean, as we are developing those tools.
Thanks. We have a few more questions in the chat. Kaylee McLaren asked, is it possible to use this model to look at flow changes associated with removing dams?
Yes, I mean, it is possible, the flood would change, I would say. The dams, we did a very detailed study, I'm gonna mention it a bit in the next part of the talk. On Patuxent River, and we released the report. That was done, and we looked at those questions. For instance, we looked at if the dams one by one were removed, what would happen to flooding? If all of the dams were removed, what would happen on the flooding? Because we have this hydraulic and hydrologic models, we could play with them. We could, for instance, remove a dam, see if the flood extent is changing around that dam. So those models could answer those questions. Yeah, but it's not part of this study, but we have those models that we could be used for those kind of purposes. Yeah.
Thanks. And then I think we have time for just a couple more. Could you confirm the scope of this analysis? Will it cover the entire state ultimately?
Yeah, so the scope, I tried to show that. So we are covering all the major watersheds, right? Let's see. I'm sorry, I think I went to the. Yeah, let's go back a bit. Was it here? I think it was here. Yeah, right there.
There.
Yeah, if you look at the right, so major watersheds like Blackstone, Patuxent, Muskotake, Woodpatuck, and others. As I mentioned, for a smaller watersheds and things like that, we have this kind of projects in BRIC that, for instance, because those communities were not involved in this, so we tried to compensate by doing more detailed analysis for Newport and Bristol County. But if it's a small stream, no. If it's a large river, yes.
Great, thank you.
You're welcome.
And then I have a question coming from Barrington. Herb Durfee noted that Barrington was just awarded a BRIC grant to conduct a scoping study for the Mashasek Creek corridor for flood risk reduction. And so the question is whether URI might be eligible to bid on the project and apply the Inland STORMTOOLS system.
I think I have to get more details about that. I don't have enough information to answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
We'll follow up with Herb on that.
Yes.
Okay,
Yeah, so Malcolm says yes.
Malcolm says yes. Okay, we'll have some follow-up conversation on that. Thank you. Okay, we do have several other questions in the chat that we unfortunately, we may not have time to get to today. But
Yeah, I mean, you could have like maybe 1, 2 more questions.
Okay.
I try to make the technical part quicker. Yeah,
okay,
if you want.
let's see. Then we'll take 1 or 2 more. We have a question about the tie-in to the USGS elevation derived hydrography. Which could result in small updates to the watershed boundary data sets.
Yeah, I mean, so what we have done, if I understand correctly, USGS already has the watershed boundaries. And we have created our own boundaries. We compare those and they relatively match because they are based on topography, but we are using the most updated topography to kind of find the boundaries of the watersheds for the hydrologic modeling. But we have compared those with the boundaries that are coming from the USGS.
Okay, thank you. And then final question that we have time for right now is, could you speak to coordination on this effort with the REMA floodplain coordinator?
We could reach out to them. We haven't.
Rayanne Pope.
Right, okay,
is
that,
the point of contact.
Yeah.
She's essentially the person that this project reports to.
Right.
She reports internally. She's also individual responsible for putting together the hazard maps that go into FEMA to report on what the state has done and what each of the communities has done. So we're extremely well connected. The focus has been here on planning. And a lot of these questions relate to real-time response, emergency response. The tools here are available to do that. As you can see, we could have run this storm event, or Reza could have run it, give you the results for it. For the areas that are within our model domain. And the issue is that that's not a focus of our current work.
Thank you. Melinda Hopkins just noted for us that Morgan Riley is the floodplain coordinator. And I imagine works closely with Rayanne as this, who serves as state hazard mitigation officer. And I am somewhat new to the project, and we'll have to look back to see about our communications with Morgan to date.
Yeah, I
And,
think it's a good idea to reach out to them, yeah.
okay, we will reach out to Morgan. Thank you very much for that, Melinda. Okay, so we really appreciate everyone's interest and questions. And from here, we'd love to ask you a few questions.
Okay, so should I go back?
Yes, if you could go back to those discussion questions, please. So we'd like to take a few minutes to talk through these 3 questions. The first being, how will you use this resource? There's individuals representing a big range of organizations on this call, I can see, and so it'd be really interesting to hear about how you might use this. And again, feel free to raise your hand and we'll call on you, or please put some thoughts in the chat box. Okay. So while everyone thinks about that, I think maybe we can also be considering the next couple questions. Since there's just 3, we can kind of talk about them together. Do folks have any feedback you want to provide on the dashboard? I know that we provided just a quick look at what the dashboard looks like right now. I know also that Chris Damon put the link to the dashboard in the chat, so I don't know if a few of you may have been poking around on it on your computers. But if so, we would, really like to hear any initial feedback you have on it. Okay, John Nelson asks, does this connect to combined surge or riverine flooding, or is that a next step in the work plan?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. The idea is to, like, if looking at the actual title of the project is seamless inland and coastal flooding. So that is the case, that we are combining the inland and coastal flooding. But I have to talk to Chris Damon on more details, because when you are looking at the, like, near to the coast, obviously the layer for the coastal flooding is gonna be higher than like the river flooding, so that's gonna like show as the flood extent. And as you go like up to the river, then the layer for the inland flooding is gonna be there. The other question is, what about if you have like a hurricane or an event that you have both rainfall and storm surge together? So that's something that Malcolm mentioned. We have the capacity to do that. To look at those kind of compound flooding using this modeling, So we just have to look at the boundary condition of the river model and make the water elevation higher. That's gonna back water all the way up to certain areas. So we can do that. But I think for the planning stage, those inland and coastal flooding maps would be superimposed, and I think whichever is higher, Zetra is gonna like show the flood extent. If it's like inland or coastal.
Yeah, there's definitely a way to bring both together, right? And we'll just have to, go through a couple iterations and see what works best for users, right? The
Yeah.
best way to bring this together and not confuse the issue.
Yeah.
You know, we've started, making that seamless transition in the Inland STORMTOOLS viewer that was mentioned today. The legend for the water depths are the same, so that they match and they line up with what is currently being displayed in the STORMTOOLs. So yes, we will be able to pull those together. What that final product is gonna look like still remains to be seen.
Thanks. Just wanna note a little bit more feedback we've gotten in the chat, in terms of how participants think they could use this resource. A couple ideas that have come up are living shoreline planning for city parks and state and local flood resilience planning and project prioritization. So thanks very much for that, for participants that added those ideas. We will welcome any other ideas. Let's see. Another question that's come up on the dashboard is there a way to export the map?
At this point, there isn't. We can definitely integrate a print tool to it,
Okay,
or include the ability to download those actual layers directly from the map. If people have a GIS or an ArcGIS online subscription and they want to map this themselves, we can make those available after the QA/QC process is complete.
great, thank you. Okay, so. And. Oh, Garth is also wondering if this will be available through Rhode Island GIS.
Yes, ultimately, this will be, all the data layers that are producing this will be available, freely available through RIGIS, as with the rest of the STORMTOOLS work.
Awesome, thank you. We've got a few more minutes and I'd love to briefly cover this last question about how we might be able to expand this research and resource into the future to further support your flood mitigation work that all these participants are working on. I think we've already heard a number of ideas through this discussion. We've talked about possibility of integrating real-time forecasts, looking at seasonality. There was mention of integrating dams and dam removal. So there's obviously a lot of exciting and important directions this can go. Are there any other needs that participants on the call want to identify at this time?
I'd be curious to know if anyone is interested in the development of an AI-based method to be able to take information about a forecasted storm event and then predict what the flooding might be at place X or place Y. Rather than doing all of this modeling work and all of this GIS work, we end up with an AI-based method. It also could work for hurricanes. We could essentially say there's a hurricane coming up the coast and here's what it looks like. What might occur because of that. And also with the changing in standards. Standards of businesses all over the place in terms of what standards are going to be developed and it turns out that we have a case where standards for one thing in the state are driven by an outside organization, whereas standards from another part are driven by another state agency. So the underlying question is there interest, support, thoughts, input on an AI-based approach to storm tools models.
So, so we will welcome feedback from this group on Professor Spalding's questions about an interest in AI-based method for this kind of work, this kind of modeling, and interest in considering changing standards. That said, I think the AI question might be a little bit, it might be helpful to return to that during the more technical part of this discussion. We might get more thoughts then. So be thinking about those questions, and feel free to add thoughts into the chat, but I do want to call out that we've received a bit of feedback from others in the chat, on the need in the future to look at flood velocities for RIDOT scour. And the ability to include local street flooding that's not associated with riverine flooding. Which is a really important need, and it sounds like that's something that the team is going to be getting started on in our next project. So we'll certainly provide updates. And Sam, regarding the question on AI-based modeling methods, Sam has identified some concern about all the resources it takes to run those AI tools. So that's certainly worth considering. We are getting to the end of our part one discussion, and we really appreciate all of the excellent feedback and questions we've gotten from everyone. So in terms of our most immediate next steps, we're wrapping up our part one discussion. If you have any additional comments or questions, please feel free to email me at eliza.berry@uri.edu. There's a few questions that came up in the chat that we didn't get to, so when we send you a follow-up email with this recording and notes, we'll provide responses to those questions. And we'll be continuing to organize these webinars to provide updates on our ongoing work in this area. So we want to thank everyone for your input and participation today, and now transition into our more technical discussion of data and methods. So as I said before, you're welcome to stay on for the rest of this, but just please note it's going to be a little bit more technical.
Thanks, Eliza. So the reason that we are doing this technical part is just we want to show that what is the scientific evidence of those flood maps that we are generating, and why we have to, like, somehow we can trust them. So there's always uncertainty in science, but we have to kind of show like the basis of the methodology. As I mentioned, we plan to publish those as well, but I'm just very quickly, RS provided a lot of slides. I eliminated 80% of those. And I'm just going to show a couple of slides. So one of the things about the technical part is paper, flood risk in the past and future, a case study for Patuxent River record-breaking March event. We have provided a lot of technical details that we are following the same methodology. If you are interested in that, you could look at those. There is also a Rhode Island champ group that they have been working on similar areas. I've been collaborating with them, and they have particularly worked on the Moshasek and Muskwatucket River. And they have done some work on the hurricane barrier, so that's also available. So we have looked at those, and we are collaborating with those as well. So in terms of the tech engine that we use, there is a product by U.S. Army Corps of Engineers called HEC, and they have a hydrologic model and a hydraulic model. The USGS and other consultants, I just talked to them maybe 2 weeks ago. It's not just USGS. In some streams, there are also private consultants that they work on the flood insurance maps and they provide that to FEMA. They mainly use the same product across to do the river modeling. So in terms of our approach, we created a hydrologic model based on the digital elevation model that we have with this 1 meter or 3 feet resolution for the state. And this shows our kind of watersheds and how the color map shows the elevation. We have to use the land use as well as the soil type to identify how much of the rain is changing to runoff. So we use land cover database and LCD. There are a lot of I would say changes in land cover and variations, but I would not worry much about like using the most up-to-date version of the land use data because these hydrologic models are very large and they are not very sensitive to small land use changes. If you are looking at a street flooding or stormwater management, those land use are very more important than here. We try to use the best one for land use. We also use this. What I noticed is that a lot of the areas of this watershed is does not have like good infiltration rates in terms of the soil type. So that's kind of important to look at what kind of soil and how much of permeability we call it they have. So we have to combine that with the land use to come up with the runoff coefficient. So this is the USDA kind of land use data that we used in GIS, and we obviously combine those. So there's a lookup table based on the land use and the soil type that you could find the CN or curve number or runoff coefficient. So we created this kind of map that we showed in the first spot, which was the runoff coefficient. The other thing is the stations and data that we used. Unfortunately, there is just one good station for the Rhode Island, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong. Apart from TF Green Airport, we don't have a station with very long and hourly rainfall data. The closest is in Massachusetts and Worcester. We just use that one. There is also this grid of Pinecast or model rainfall data that we help. Sometimes those data is not making any sense, the rainfall data, and it is making us crazy because he runs the model and he says that nothing makes sense in terms of the flow in the river, and we go back and see there is something wrong in the rainfall data. So we have to look at other resources to see what's going on. So we are using Pinecast. This is showing like an example of a Pinecast and observation and how they are not very kind of matching very well, but still they follow the same trend. So in order to make sure our rainfall runoff model, or like how we generate the rainfall data, how the rainfall generates the flood works, we ran all of these events from 1998 all the way to January 2024. And we kind of estimated what kind of return period they show. So I'm just going to show one of those. So this is like a 2000, like last year, December, like 1 year approximately ago, there was an event, which is kind of a big event, like a 50-year return period. And that created all of this flooding in this area. And we ran that with the model that's That shows like the performance of the model. Obviously, we have to tune the model using the runoff coefficient, but the runoff coefficient seems to be reasonable in that kind of part. This is like showing the comparison of the peak flow in Moshasset River at the USGS station. In order to check the FEMA flood maps, what did we do? We used the USGS flow rates for the station. We ran it with different return period, and then we with the model. So we have all of these cross sections. We ran it, and then we came up with the difference of or simple like comparison that shows, for instance, that shows how FEMA flood maps, which are dashed lines, compares with our hydrologic model. As you can see, they follow the same thing, but in some areas, I believe mostly it's because of the topographic map that we are using. There are some discrepancies. Also, I asked Arash to kind of work on these cross sections and extend them in some areas using the DM. So it's kind of. The next one, which is a big question, is that if you have 25% change in rainfall, what does that mean in terms of flood? How much more flood you have? Is it going to be exactly the same? Is it going to be less, more, or flood in the river? So that's the question. So we looked at this paper, which is dealing with the same thing, accuracy of rainfall radar in predicting peak flow changes to rainfall changes, right? So that's what we are talking about. So this paper shows that you are talking about 50 to 80% change in the flow rates when you are changing the precipitation. So that was not very kind of the only thing that we used. So we kind of looked at the method that we are using, one of the methods which gives us the peak flow in a river based on precipitation and infiltration. So that's the peak flow. We kind of take the derivative of this equation and see how sensitive is that to the precipitation. Obviously, this is very, very simple model. In hydrology, I apologize. We have much more sophisticated models nowadays. But usually, if you want to make sense of something, you have to use a very simple methodology. And then we came up with this graph showing, for instance, if we have 20%, you're talking, or 25%, you are approaching 50%. Change in rainfall. So that's what we are basing the maps. So like 25% giving you nearly, or 30% giving you nearly 50% change. And then we looked at other methods comparison. The green one was from that paper. We had this equation. We also ran the model, like we had this hydrologic model. We just increased the rainfall for an event with 27% higher and saw how much more flow rates in the river we get. And they are all aligned, and we got this kind of added this 50%. So we tried to use different methodologies to have trust in our method. Right, so I think I'm gonna stop here. So we just closing the loop. We have used all of this three, modeling, hydrology, hydraulics, and the GIS to create those updated maps. And then I will hand it over to Eliza. If you want, or should I run the? I think or do you want me to do the panel discussion?
Thank you. I thought we would take a few minutes right now just to
Sure.
do Q&A, see what questions we have from the audience regarding your presentation. And then And then I'll hand it back to you for the
Sure.
panel discussion. Thanks for that.
Sure.
Yeah, so opening it up to the whole group now. Are there any questions that have come up on the content that Reza just shared with all of us? Also happy to take comments too, if you have any comments on the methodology he shared and the results. So again, feel free to write in the chat or raise your hand, I'll unmute you. Okay. Our first question, Reza, is for rainfall data, is there any reason to not also use data from the community collaborative rain, hail, and snow network? Also known as COCO-RAS.
Okay,
Are you familiar with them?
no, Arash, have you heard of this?
No, I didn't hear of
I
that.
think that would be, the question is that we have to use hourly or even with a good like resolution. So if somebody tells us that we had 5 inches of rainfall in 24 hours, that's helpful, but not as helpful as someone tells us in each hour of that 24 hours, how much rainfall we have. That's the data that we have in like the airport, which is hourly data. So I think, but still, if it's a long, we have to look at what kind of data, but any data would be helpful.
Okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
If you send out that information, that would be good.
Yeah, we have the link to that resource in the chat, so
Okay.
thank you, Garth, for sharing that. We'll definitely take a look.
Yeah, great, thank you so much.
Okay, any other questions or comments from the group? Thomas Fitzpatrick noted that USGS stream gauges can be fooled by dam outlet discharges before major storms. Owners often open floodgates many hours, even days before a major storm to increase capacity.
That's interesting point. Yeah, all right, so what I'm hearing is that you could have this artificial increase of flow, which is not precipitation, it's just the flow by dams, right? So I think that's good to know.
Yeah,
What we have been focusing is on the peak flow, right? So if they impact the peak flow, that's in analysis for the flood maps important. But if they are just affecting how we reach to the peak flow,
yeah,
it's not significant. You know what I mean? So if you are getting to the peak flow like sooner, so that's not gonna change something. But if they increase the peak flow, that's a different thing. So it's good to know. All those kind of textile mill dams, they usually don't have a large capacity. If you have a dam like Situate, that is extremely important. So depending on water elevation in the Situate reservoir, with the same rainfall, we could have a 10-year event, or you could have 500-year event with the same rainfall.
wow,
If the dam is full, you could get 100-year or 500-year, like the famous flooding in March 2020. If the dam has capacity, it could just absorb 90% of the runoff, and you would have like a 10-year kind of event. But those are small dams, they have some impacts, yeah.
okay. Thomas noted that he does think that peak flows may actually be worse than the stream gauges show, given that issue of the floodgates opening before storms. So maybe that's a point we could follow up with him on and discuss further.
Yeah, that's
Thank
good.
you. Any other questions from this group? seeing a lull in questions and comments, I think it'd be good if we could move over to a bit of a panel discussion,
Yeah,
where
sure.
Reza has some questions for
Yeah,
group of
then we could
researchers.
open it up, yeah.
Yeah, and then we can open it up.
Yeah, so I have three questions for Marshall and Malcolm and Chris Damon. I'm gonna start with Marshall. So we have this like tools that they predict the hazard. How do you think those could be used for like making a change to mitigate the flood risk? By just being aware that your house is flooded or it's going to be flooded and it was not used to be flooded. It's going to be in flood zone, it was not in flood zone. How do you think that information would help the property owners?
So, very good question. So usually in terms of the risk to properties, you need three different components,
Yeah,
which is the hazard, exposure, and also the risk assessment
mhm,
together. So as you mentioned, the storm tools and also the inland flooding tools can provide the hazard value,
yeah,
which is the flood depth, or next step can be the flood velocity, for example.
yeah,
With those values, given the building characteristic that we have, for example, is it a residential building, commercial building, what's the building type, and what's the concern of the homeowners? We can develop, first step, we can predict the potential damage for the status quo of the buildings. For example, what's the probability of damage because of the specific flood in terms of the damage level and also the monetary loss that can expose to the buildings. Then the next step would be what's the mitigation measure we can propose that technically is a part of the next, the new brick proposal that we can say, for example, what if we look at the different flood proofing mitigation strategies? How we can do, for example, what if we use waterproof material for the first grade or first story of the building? Or if the building is in the coastal areas, what would be the loss or damage gonna decrease if we elevate the foundation above the base flood elevation? All of those. And the important thing is for the new brick proposal that we have, we want to also provide some benefit cost analysis in order to, okay, how much does it cost to do the mitigation and how much is gonna affect the future loss for the specific buildings. And also it can be categorized for wind and also the flood. So because the storm tools can provide all of that in terms of the 100 and 500 return period.
yeah, excellent, thank you.
I will be happy to answer your question.
Yeah, sure. I mean, that would be a very good step to just use it to reduce the risk of flooding. And having this like cost benefit analysis, we are trying to do that hopefully as an app added to Siri, which is like a storm tools app that you could hopefully, we just like our wish to do that. You have the app, you put your property, it tells you what's the risk to it, and then it would recommend what you could do. And then what would be like an estimated cost of what you have to do, like a table with estimated cost per square feet of the property. So because we have to be careful of time, I'm gonna move to another question from Malcolm. The question is that how these tools could be incorporated in Rhode Island planning and regulatory body in a way that it could be used for planning, especially in a way like new constructions, or if you have to fully renovate the house and stuff.
So it turns out that we have a different regulatory environments.
Yeah.
So if we looked at the CRMC,
Yeah.
who has jurisdiction over the first 200 feet from the coast, the storm tools maps were generated to support their activity. And the issue was to start off with a set of maps that was for planning purposes and to explicitly address the uncertainty in those maps and to use state-of-the-art methods, which has been done. They got those maps all done, and then you got them done for sea level rise. And then the sea level rise projections change, and they change every 5 years. So fortunately, the maps that we generated have allowed us to go through at least one cycle of the sea level rise change. On the inland side, it turns out that if you go to building permits for a house that's in a given community that's not in the flood zone or not in that flood zone, but as you say, a flood zone associated with inland flooding. What happened is the building permit reverts back to the FEMA maps. And the problem with the FEMA maps, of course, is that they don't have any change related to climate change. And so a number of states, Massachusetts being our neighbor is one that's done it. And Rhode Island is in the process of doing it to get that to align. And so the idea then is to be able to have these, and we use the word seamless to make sure that the underlying methodologies work in both places and are internally consistent, and they aren't now. The other problem here is also in terms of setting the standards, different organizations drive the standards that are set. And how sea level rise or climate change is affected. So it turned out that for wastewater treatment facilities, the standards are set by collaboration in New England. And that's essentially a reconciliation of different views about what the standard should be. In terms of the building standards for Rhode Island, they're set by the Rhode Island Building Commission. And the Building Commission is about 5 years behind where the standards have changed. So the most recent standards are based on 2018, and in 2022, actually 2023, they revised the flooding maps. Methodology at the building code level for the international building code, but Rhode Island has not yet adopted those changes. So we end up having different standards along the coast, different standards inland, no consideration of climate change effects inland, detailed consideration of climate change effects in the coastal area. But it turns out that you can't force somebody to follow the standard, and so what you're doing is you are giving them some advice about the risk. So I've been advocating for a seamless set of standards that apply inland, coastal, and all include climate change.
That's great, Malcolm, thank you. So we could go back to what Malcolm mentioned, if there was a discussion or someone wants to add anything. So let's have my final question from Chris Damon. So Chris, we have been running this hydraulic and hydrologic model of ourselves, and it gives us a map for 100-year event with no precipitation change, right? So just existing flows that USGS has used to generate those flood maps. We are using the same thing. We are using the same cross sections and geometry for the event. But in some areas, if you overlay the FEMA maps and our flood generated maps with no, they should, in theory, they should match, but in some areas they don't match. Do you have any ideas? And if they don't match, what would you recommend? For, let's say I'm in that area, FEMA map says I'm in the flood zone, or vice versa, or the other map says you are not. So which one is more, you think would be more accurate?
Right, well, to your first point, on the inconsistency between the two outputs. I believe you're exactly right in that it's the underlying elevation model, right? So the elevation model that we're using for inland storm pools is the exact same elevation model that we're using for the rest of storm pools. All of the inland topography is developed from the 2011 USGS LiDAR project for the state. That is being fed into the process, right? So our results are tied directly to that 1 meter resolution elevation model for the state. I don't have any knowledge of what FEMA is using for their elevation model, whether it's an older 30 meter digital elevation model. I just don't know. What you do when they don't align, I think that's a question that goes all the way, back to storm tools in general, right? You can't necessarily force people because to adopt our work, right? For storm tools, we are advisory, we're not regulatory. So for the regulatory component, it comes back to the FEMA maps as, quote unquote, the truth. I think what we're showing is a better refinement of where water is actually going to be, right? And through projects such as My Coast and some of these crowdsourcing applications where people can go out during events, take geotagged photos and submit them, it helps us in the entire storm tool spectrum to validate, the output that we're seeing.
Exactly, yeah, thanks.
And I'll add one more point to something Garth mentioned in the quote about, or the chat about the 3D HP project. I know early on you sat in on a meeting. Rhode Island is interested in participating in this effort for 3D HP. We have never had a hydro connected elevation model developed for the state. It's always been a problem. We know it's been a problem, but nobody's been willing to fund the hydro connected elevation model. Having the 3D HP and getting this connectivity that's derived at the elevation model level, when something like that is developed, if it's finally delivered for the state of Rhode Island, we can take that conditioned elevation model and feed it in to your modeling that you're doing for even better results, right? Something that includes culverts and really begins to show where water is going to go.
Exactly. I mean, in addition to that, I don't know if that's also gonna part of it. So we have this problem with the river depths and coastal depths of bathymetry, which is not in the DEM maps or topographic maps. And for this project, we are relying on cross sections that USGS has surveyed those rivers. So if you are talking about a stream or somewhere that has not been surveyed, we cannot generate those maps accurately just using the DEM or topographic data. So I think that's also another missing data for the rivers and coastal. I think for coastal, we are better. We have this coastal bathymetric maps, but for rivers, I'm not aware, apart from that river cross section, is there any other?
Not that we have, you're right. So for anything along the coast, we have incorporated bathymetric LiDAR, and a little bit further offshore gets into the hydrographic surveys. The elevation model, the LiDAR, when it was delivered, what was delivered was a hydro flattened database. So that basically took all of the ponds and the larger bodies of water, flattened them to get rid of noise, and assigned a single elevation value to them. But correct, we don't have any bathymetric data for these river systems. Maybe it exists piecemeal in certain areas, but I haven't worked with that.
Yeah, I actually had a discussion with USGS, and they said that in some areas, they don't have any choice. They just assume a water depth for a river. And they just run the model, depending on how important is that.
In a follow-up, Garth is asking why not use the 2022 LiDAR, and the answer is simple, because it is such a monumental task to run all of Storm Tools against, this topography surface that's created. There isn't, the time or the budget to go back and rerun all of Storm Tools with the 2022 LiDAR. If we stick with what we have, we're internally consistent, like Malcolm said, on the data sets that are being used for both applications. At some point in the future, there may be a budget to rerun all of Storm Tools with upgraded topographic data. My guess is that the amount of change between the two bare earth models between 2011 and 2022 are probably not going to impact the system all that much. But that's just my hypothesis.
Thank you. I think I'm just gonna hand it over to Eliza because I think we are closing to the end.
Yeah. Yeah, we've reached the end of our time and just want to say thank you so much for this really productive discussion. This group online has provided us a lot of really valuable ideas and input, and we look forward to continuing to update you on our progress with these efforts. Again, if you have any other questions or feedback for us, feel free to send me an email and I'll be following up with notes and question responses from this discussion. And yeah, I think we'll wrap it up there. Thank you all so much for your time and attention.
And if there is a technical question apart from Eliza, you could also email me, or I would be happy to talk to people. I've done it a couple of times. Especially if you're interested in a specific area, feel free to reach out. Thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
Supposed to be.
Thanks.